Welcome back to Introduction to Philosophy. This is Dr. Benjamin Smith. You'll recall that in previous classes, we spent some time thinking about the meaning and importance of philosophy. And then in our prior class, we proceeded to begin looking at criticizing and defining certain modern errors that are really obstacles to learning and to truth and to wisdom. This is not just sort of being negative or excessively critical. This kind of task, as St. Thomas teaches us, is really part of the office of the wise man. You will recall from a previous class that according to St. Thomas, the office of the wise man includes not only teaching wisdom, but also refuting error, right? We're supposed to refute those errors, not out of cruelty or arrogance, but in order to help ourselves and to help others to reach towards truth and wisdom. So in this class, we're going to continue this part of the office of the wise man. That is, we're going to continue in the criticism, refutation, and critique of some modern errors. In our previous class, we looked at the errors of relativism and postmodernism. And we saw that those theories are ultimately irrational and self-defeating. And that if you follow them, you'll just end up misguided and confused. So they're ultimately misguiding because they teach us a relativity about truth that ultimately doesn't work, right? They undermine themselves, right? Relativism says there's no absolute truth, but if that's true, then relativism is not absolutely true. Postmodernism tells us that there are no meta-narratives, but postmodernism is itself is a meta-narrative, so it must also be false. So both of these approaches to thought and to culture are themselves irrational and self-defeating. In this class, we're going to turn sort of towards the other direction, a different kind of error that confronts us today. Relativism and postmodernism sort of have the feel of a skeptical approach to knowledge and to learning. In this class, we're going to be turning towards looking at a more rationalistic error. That is an error that goes from being sort of skeptical about the power of human reason to an error that is probably overly confident about the power of human reason. And this is interesting. We run into this frequently since the Enlightenment, that there's a persistent tendency to go back and forth between extreme skepticism or extreme optimism about the power of reason. As I like to tell my students sometimes, for whatever reason, and ultimately as Christians we know the reason, but we have a tendency, because of the darkening of the intellect from original sin, to veer from one error to the other extreme error, instead of staying in the solid middle. So we tend to at some point recognize, oh, there's a cliff over here, and if I continue keep going, I'm going to fall off that cliff. But instead of saying, well, I just should probably stay still, we say, instead of running off this cliff, let's run the other direction and fall off the cliff over there, right? And that's often what we see happening in our modern world, and this is exactly what we see when we think about the errors of relativism on the one hand versus scientism on the other. So in this class, we're going to be talking about scientism. Now first, it's important to start with some initial clarifications. Scientism is not science itself, okay? This exploration of scientism is not an exploration of the practice of science itself in the laboratory or in schools. Rather, scientism is a theory about science. So try to keep that clear. Scientism is not science itself, but a theory about science. Technically speaking, within the context of philosophy, scientism is what's called an epistemological theory. Now let's back up here, and just in case you don't remember. An epistemological theory is a philosophical theory about learning, truth, and knowledge, especially about what is true and how do you learn it, okay? And so when a philosopher is thinking about this, he's thinking about, well, what are the first principles of truth, and what are the ultimate explanations of learning? What brings about the truth at a foundational level, and how do we get it? In our next class, we're going to talk about truth. So next class will actually be focused on epistemology. Now, epistemology in itself is just a branch of philosophy, and there are several different branches of philosophy. Within epistemology, there are several different kinds of epistemologies, right? There are different epistemological theories. The theory we're going to be focused on in future classes is what's often called classical realism, right? And this is the view that the human mind can come to know the truth about reality, and that reality is the ultimate standard for the human mind. Again, we'll start talking about that in the next class. But scientism then is an epistemological theory. It's one theory among many other theories about the nature of truth and learning and knowledge. All right? So what is scientism itself? What does the theory state? First, it's important to recognize that there are various expressions of scientism. There's not just one version of it. And to recognize that it's not, again, it's not science itself. That scientism is not science itself. It's a theory about science and about the epistemological status of science. The basic idea of scientism is this. That is that science is the only reliable method for learning the truth. Again, science is the only reliable method for learning the truth. All other methods are at least deficient and subpar, if not, in fact, misleading and misguided, according to those who hold this theory. So one last time, scientism is the view that science is the only reliable method for learning the truth. Now, just note something very important about this thesis. It's entirely possible, and I would say you should think that science is reliable. I think that science is reliable, but I don't hold to scientism. To hold for scientism is something more than just thinking that science is reliable or fecund or helpful and useful. Certainly all those things are true about the scientific method, about the practice of science. Scientism, though, goes more than just affirming the reliability and value of science to say that it's the only, and that's the key point, the only method for learning the truth. So scientism is a very restrictive view about learning and knowledge and objectivity.